Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniekolo. Now, Nigeria's long-awaited restructuring of its petroleum industry has once again moved to the top of the agenda after President Buhari submitted the text of the latest petroleum industry bill to the National Assembly for approval. It reportedly includes the framework for the privatization of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC, although the timing and precise form of that privatization is unclear. It's also understood that the bill includes initiatives to amend oil and gas royalties, aiming to make the sector more attractive to investment, as well as changes to certain key petroleum sector regulatory bodies, environmental and social components, and initiatives to promote gas monetization. In the last 20 years, various initiatives to reform the laws and regulatory structures governing the Nigerian petroleum sector have been advanced, but in many instances have not resulted in significant structural change. So, what's likely to be different this time? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by Dr. Ahmed Adamu, who is a lecturer in oil and gas at Nile University here in Abuja. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Mr. Charles.
What's your assessment of this latest petroleum industry bill? Where is it strong? Where is it weak in your view?
I think first, this is a long-awaited reform. There have been great changes across the global energy sector, especially petroleum. The market has changed, the pricing, the demand and supply, the structural economies have changed, structure of the economies have changed, technology have emerged, climate change campaign have been evolving. So a lot of changes have been happening around the petroleum sector, and is timely and advisable for every country to transform their petroleum sector. So I think Nigerian petroleum sector has been it's been operating on an old system. So it's an outdated system. So it's a step on the right direction to transform the petroleum sector. It's long overdue. But the most important transformation in this reform is the commercialization of the NNPC. We have this kind of primitive belief that NNPC is our own mother company. It's a company or parastatal or organization of the government that belongs to all Nigerians, and all our benefit, all oil money comes from NNPC. That's our common belief. But this NNPC has not been very efficient. And what this transformation wants to have is that to have a new NNPC where is targeted for profit, is profit motivated rather than just for maintenance, just to have it there. NNPC has been operating on loss, on great losses, and liabilities are so much on it, especially the recent report we have read where NNPC spent over $10 billion on 10 billion naira on maintaining these refineries, and they have not produced a single refined petroleum. So commercialization is, I think, the way they presented it is the way that the government will now own all the shares in the beginning. Right. But I think they are not being so open to Nigerians.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was going to say that from what I've heard, it's left the NNPC largely intact. There's no unbundling or restructuring, and also nothing on privatization or the refineries and that sort of thing. I mean, what do you make of
the idea is, according to the bill, what they want is to have the shares of the NNPC being sold to NNPC 100%. I mean, sold to government. So now government will now own all the shares of the NNPC. You are privatizing NNPC, but who is the owner of NNPC?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Still the government. But the idea is, they say in the beginning, but this is where the caveat is. They said, according to the new act, then the NNPC Limited can then increase the shares. And that's open space for private investors to buy shares. So the government
owns 100% of shares at the outset.
At the beginning. But the idea is now, what government is trying to do is, I'm earmarking a certain amount of money, I'm giving you NNPC. I'm not going to involve myself in NNPC operation anymore. Any loss, any liability, you're on your own. So just like budgeting certain amount of money to just relieve yourself of the future losses. But eventually, NNPC, we know government are not good in managing businesses. So what was going to happen is we are going to go back to this kind of losses, liabilities, and inefficiencies. So what the government then, what NNPC Limited will do eventually will to open the shares for private investors. So more or less what we are going to have is privatization of NNPC. And this is a very popular idea that we have been debating along in our national
but of course
political
it's theory at the moment. I mean,
so what I see in the future is privatizing the NNPC.
Right.
And another thing is emergence of new regulatory bodies, especially the upstream and then midstream and downstream regulatory commission,
Right.
which will be responsible for technical and commercial operations of the petroleum sector
Right.
at the upstream and then the midstream and downstream sectors respectively.
Right.
But another major reform is in the area of royalty you mentioned.
Yes.
Right now we operate what you call the ad valorem royalty, where the higher you produce, the higher you are being charged. So what they are going to do now is they are going to make it fixed, irrespective of how much quantity you produce.
Because I mean the oil companies, they didn't like the previous arrangement.
Yes, so the more you produce, the more you give.
Right.
But it gives the government more benefits, more prospect, and I think that's very logical for us to tap more into our resources.
Right. What about host communities, like the Niger Delta? How does it deal with that?
You know, in the past, what the host communities used to have is just an informal setting. You just come and say, hey, you didn't build roads. Contaminating our environment. So they don't have a legal backing. They don't have support. So what this bill is trying to do is to support them to set up what they call the trust, community trust organization, so to say, where they will register with CAC so that they can sue and they can be sued, so they can speak with one voice. So it's more or less like an independent voice for the host communities so that they can now come up with plan. This is what we want for our community. Okay, now you are polluting our environment, you are displacing our people. This is what we want. And we enter agreement with you, you're operating in an area, this is what we want. So you can sign agreement and then you can sue the operator in your area. So it enables them to, it gives the host community the voice and the platform. It
empowers them, basically.
Yeah, the platform to operate. And I think it may not be so attractive to the operators, so to say, to see that host communities are empowered, so that they will be held responsible, especially when in terms of social corporate responsibility.
Right. And on the whole, you've obviously gone through this bill. Does it seem like this bill has been a rather smart move by President Buhari, that everyone, well, most people will be happy with, most Nigerians?
Well, it depends on the aspect you look at it. If you look at the current administration's policies on petroleum sector, what they're trying to do is to privatize the sector entirely. The recent deregulation of the sector led to the removal of subsidy. I think twice we have had that. And if you look at the entire petroleum sector, let's start from the upstream sector. In terms of exploration, government is not doing much. In terms of production, Nigerian government is only contributing 10% to oil production, daily oil production in the country, which is so insignificant. And if you look at transportation of the crude oil to our refineries, because our refineries are not operating, so we don't have transportation locally. If you look at the downstream, the pricing sector, the government is not providing subsidies. So why is the government in the sector? The government is absent, it's nowhere to be found. So the best idea, the best thing to do is to privatize it. So hand it over to people that are targeting profit. They will maintain it, they will ensure efficiency. So I think it's a brilliant idea. And it's the idea I think most Nigerians kicked against before, but now I think that's the first option. Even though the timing, like you mentioned, it has to be critical here because we're just coming out from a coronavirus lockdown and we have a lot of unemployment, inflation is on the rise, and it's something that you can do it in gradual phases.
Right, but let me ask you, we've got less than a minute left. From the point of view of the international investor, though, what are the lingering problems that are continuing to foster distrust in the system, and were those things taken care of? We've got about 30 seconds.
Largely it's marginal field development. You know, these international big operators, they want to keep their marginal fields with them, but this new bill is trying to collect it back from them. Maybe you want to keep it maybe until when prices are high, I will develop this field, or maybe this field is very expensive to produce. When I get more profit, I will do that, or maybe it's giving me little quantity, I will not develop it now.
Right.
But what this bill is trying to do is to collect it from them and hand it over to the small producers at a lower cost.
Dr. Ahmed Adamu, brilliant stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Adamu is a lecturer in oil and gas at Nile University in Abuja. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, the UK and the United States, bye-bye and thank you for watching.